Pac-Man, gobble the Energizers or get gobbled by ghosts. And welcome to Nostalgia, chronological exploration of every NES game released in North America. I'm Mike.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Joe.
And right off the bat, we've got to discuss this chronologicalness because this is a weird time for chronological orders in NES games, specifically released in North America, because I'm not sure exactly where to put Pac-Man. It had an unlicensed version, it had a licensed version, Namco put out an official version in 1993, so, you know, I'm placing it here, but for all we know, we should have played Pac-Man months ago, or we're playing it too early.
Yeah, a few months ago, I played Pac-Man in preparation of one of these episodes, and I had learned that I had played the wrong game. So I went off after the unlicensed version, which I believe should be wrong regardless.
Yeah, unlicensed games are illegal, for what it's worth. They
are illegal.
Well, you know, that brings up a good discussion. Are they illegal? Because Nintendo did fight this and pretty much won. Because Tengen is the company that made this Pac-Man game. Really is just a subsidiary of Atari, who wanted to make this spin-off label because they saw a loophole in one of Nintendo's rules that basically a developer could only release a certain amount of games for the NES in a particular year. And Atari didn't like that, so they created Tengen so this way they could release more. And Tengen also saw an opportunity to just reverse engineer the lockout chip on the NES, and so this way they could make chips without going through Nintendo's official seal and releasing them into the market. Nintendo didn't like that one bit, and they told Toys R Us and other game stores, like, if you sell Tengen games, you won't be selling any official Nintendo games, so take your pick. Huh.
That's pretty rough.
And
very the man of them.
Right, we could talk about, like, whether that was cool, you know, or legal. But we're not going to do that because we're just going to focus on Pac-Man the game here. And before we even talk about the NES version, I just want to hear your guys' like familiarity with Pac-Man. Like, when do you first remember playing Pac-Man? What does Pac-Man mean to you? He is kind of a video game icon. So, Joe, let's start with you.
I mean, it's hard to really remember, like, my first... You know, obviously, there's so many versions of Pac-Man. You can play Pac-Man on so many different, like, platforms. The one that I remember the most is not by any means the classic Pac-Man, but it was on like my Windows computer, and it was just some random program that was like an endless Pac-Man. It was like each level was like 5 or 6 of these one Pac-Man screens. So when you go off to the little thing to the left or the right that usually loops you around, it would take you to another screen. And it had like a jazzy music to it. I don't think it was a very popular thing. I just remember like playing that on our old like Windows 98 computer for a while. But then obviously I've played a lot of other things. Like a couple of years ago, somebody had like this. I think it's like a moderately popular like Pac-Man game, but he had it on his Roku TV, and I don't remember what it's called, but it was just like another like endless Pac-Man thing. Wow. Yeah, but, you know,
Pac-Man 256, I think it was?
Yes, that's the one. Yep. Yeah, that's it. I knew that one was kind of recognizable, so I was hoping one of you guys would remember what it was.
Yeah, so I remember the first time I played Super Mario, and I remember the first time I played a lot of games from this era, but because nobody in our age bracket can seem to remember the first time they played Pac-Man, I can only imagine that it's just you're born with the knowledge. Because I have no idea the first time I played this was probably when I was 3 or 4 years old. No, I mean, I enjoy it. I can't get past like the third level, but it's got a very satisfying quality to it.
You know, I actually can remember I wouldn't say I like remember the date, but I can remember playing this on my grandmother's NES one day when we went over there. They had Super Mario Brothers, Pac-Man, and I want to say Paperboy. and I remember playing Pac-Man, and I think what's cool about Pac-Man is that from the time I first played it until now, I haven't gotten any better. I play Pac-Man. To Sean's point, I enjoy Pac-Man. It satisfies, and I think that's the universal appeal of a game like Pac-Man, is that there are certain people who know, like, well, if you go in this exact order, if you go in this route for this map, the ghost will never touch you, and you'll be able to eat all four of them all the time. And it's like, that's one way to play a game. But then there's also just like a satisfactory way of playing something that's just for fun, that like people who never play video games will still play something like Pac-Man, Pong. I don't know what else really fits into that category of like so simple that anyone can enjoy them. But Pac-Man definitely...
Centipede?
Yeah, Centipede, there you go. Again, Space Invader's probably more likely than Centipede.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Pac-Man just had something about him, so early on, there aren't other games like that. Like, why have we not seen other games that just take place in like an enclosed maze and you just have to like traverse through it? Like that doesn't exist as a genre.
I feel like because it's so simple that any way that you do it, if you're going to be close enough to Pac-Man, will just look like a ripoff of Pac-Man. It's like such a simple gameplay style. It's you go through a maze and you collect the dots. Then there's just something very satisfying about just systematically cleaning up this board. like I think that's really what it is. Just seeing your progress like very visibly on the screen is like what to me is like, that's so satisfying. You're just kind of like vacuuming up all these I'm making it sound really boring, but you're just like cleaning up this whole board, and by the end
you're right.
I did that. I undid everything that was on this board.
Yeah, that when you have that feeling of yeah, I guess I can't really describe it in any other words, but if you have a bunch of stuff on the board and your goal is to get rid of it, that is in itself a satisfying. I don't know if it's like something deep in our psyche, but
yeah, dude. I mean, I get satisfied when I mow the lawn and I look back and I'm like, wow, look how much shorter the grass is. I did all that. Like that's what this is like, scratching that same itch.
For sure.
And sure, Pac-Man could get a game where he mows the lawn, and that happens, but it is interesting that nobody decided to also make a game like that. And to be clear, there are plenty of Pac-Man clones on all sorts of early consoles. I think like the Atari 2600, the ColecoVision, the Intellivision, they all had Pac-Man clones, but nothing was able to take over what made Pac-Man such a strong game and stop its domination. And people were really just... waiting for Pac-Man to come to those consoles appropriately. So if you had beaten Pac-Man to the Atari 2600 and created basically the same game, it still didn't win because it wasn't Pac-Man. I think that says something about a game like this, right?
I think so.
So, we talked about that Pac-Man's enjoyable and that it satisfies, but other than just clearing the stage, what makes the game fun to you guys? The ghosts that are chasing you, Blinky, the red one, Pinky, the pink one, Inky, who I believe is referred to as Cyan, and Clyde, who's orange. These four ghosts that just traverse the screen, they don't really have any rhyme or reason either. I wouldn't say they're like well-programmed AI, right? I think it's somewhere built into the code that one of them follows you, another one roams, another one purposefully like dodges corners that you don't dodge. I know there is some design logic there, but for the most part, you're just kind of like, it's this game of tag, right?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't dismiss the creative AI that they put into the game outright, because I think it is very creative the way that they made it so that it's not just like you get a conga line behind you, because this game very easily could have fallen into that. So that it's always just a matter of time until you're cornered. But yeah, I think that without that, this game would have been way too easy and would not have the same legacy that it does now.
Yeah, I was going to mention too, I actually had forgotten until a little bit into playing this game that I had heard, in my adult life sometime that the Ghost had such specific programming. And I think that's really cool, and I'm still not familiar enough with them to be able to like use that to my advantage or use that information. But that makes me a little more interested in like playing more, just to see, like, if you watch someone who's like good at this game play it, it looks like they are aware, okay, like Pinky's coming at me, but I know the way Pinky moves, so I know kind of how to counter that right off the bat. I think that's a cool thing, and it's also just a fun bit of knowledge where I feel like not everybody knows that when they play Pac-Man, so it's kind of a cool little Easter egg to drop on someone.
Yeah, it's a great topic for parties.
Yeah.
And there's not much else going on, right? Like, you have the power pellets and you have the fruit that appear in the center of the screen, but it's not like the game gets more complicated as you go on. If I understand correctly, it's just that the ghosts get faster and the time that you have between the power pellet and the ghost, like
everything gets faster.
Everything just gets faster, right? So, what do you think about that as an approach? Like, we always complain about, games that don't have enough going on after a certain amount of gameplay loop. Is this simple enough that it's just fine and it's almost just like your brain, it's using like a separate part of your brain that just enjoys doing this?
I personally would have liked to see like vastly changed layouts of the maze. Because I think another thing that makes this game fun is that it's not just, oh my god, I gotta get all the power pellets or whatever they're called, energy pellets or whatever, and not get hit by the ghosts. But it's also like effectively managing your route to kind of like take as little time as possible, at least for me. So you're in danger. Like, I don't want to miss a bunch of dots in the bottom left corner and have to come back to it later. Like, I want to be able to make every like pass through every passage, like, capitalize. Yeah, exactly. And I imagine that if you're playing this a lot and you're getting really good at it and it's always the same layout of the board, even if it gets faster, you kind of will just have like go-to strategies for every level, and it'll stop challenging you on that level, and then it'll just become a test of your reflexes, and it might just lose that more cerebral aspect of it that it would have if it was like a new layout every time.
You also have to remember that not only are you getting this moment-to-moment gameplay, and it's it's very tight in that regard, but every couple levels you do get a slice of the very involved story of Pac-Man.
Right, that's true. The cutscenes are, some people refer to them as the first video game cutscenes.
I think they're right.
I think it's kind of funny to call them cutscenes at all, but it is nice that you get anything other than just the next maze, because technically, Joe, as we talked about earlier, the Pac-Man 256 thing, that's alluding to the fact that there are 256 mazes, and then you get to the kill screen, which basically is just like a nonsense screen that glitches out on you and forces the game to end. That's pretty much all Pac-Man has to offer, is just 256 mazes as it gets faster and faster. I'm sure there is a limit so that, like, after, who knows, maybe even the first 20 stages, it's like the speed just remains constant from that point on. I am not a pro Pac-Man player and don't know, but I think it's kind of interesting that for future Pac-Man games would try to like add on to the Pac-Man formula, and you guys have, I guarantee you've never heard of these games. Like, after
Mike, before we go into like the
I'm not doing sequel. I'm not doing sequels and spin-offs. I'm bringing up a point here about the simplicity of the game, and how it works in its favor, because a lot of times we pick on simple games as like, yeah, I mean, all you could really do in this game was just shoot, so that wasn't that fun. But meanwhile, it's like, yeah, all you can do is eat dots in this game, but we're loving it.
Yeah, but that's the difference between simplicity and elegance, and I think that Pac-Man is an elegant game.
I want to talk about, and this is not sequels and spin-offs, but I want to talk about Pac-Man Plus, Super Pac-Man, Baby Pac-Man, Professor Pac-Man, and Pac-and-Pal. These are the first arcade games in a line of, like, who knows, there's countless Pac-Man games. So these are the first in a series of Pac-Man arcade games that I guarantee you guys have no idea what any of those are and what makes them different than regular Pac-Man. Am I right?
I haven't played any of those.
Joe?
Correct.
Okay, yeah, because it's like, it's interesting. So Pac-Man Plus is virtually the same exact game as regular Pac-Man, except for that they tweaked the graphics a little bit so that now the maze is green instead of blue. And honestly, I think that's where most players probably got off. They were like, well, the screen's green. I don't know what that's about. Probably defective, you know?
I thought you meant they like got off on that. I was like, what?
Yeah.
Like most players are like, wow, this is great.
But now there's also like they added bonus items like a can of Coca-Cola and stuff like that. And eating a power pellet sometimes has unpredictable results. And I think that kind of stuff in Pac-Man Plus is what made people not be like, oh, well, this is better than Pac-Man in every way. People liked playing Pac-Man. They didn't want the changes.
Now, could you explain what would happen if, in some instances, that you'd eat a power pellet?
So if you ate a power pellet, sometimes it would turn the maze invisible.
Oh, geez.
Or it would turn only 3 of the 4 ghosts blue.
Oh.
You know? The ghosts were also faster and more aggressive than they were in the original Pac-Man. So I just think, like, that's an example of, like, I might have wanted, like a can of Coca-Cola in the original Pac-Man. Seems harmless, right? But maybe it wouldn't have sold as well.
Seems refreshing.
Yeah. Coca-Cola satisfies. And then Baby Pac-Man, a game that is basically Pac-Man, but also adds a pinball machine to the bottom of it.
Oh.
Wait.
I don't understand that at all. But...
yeah. Are you controlling Pac-Man while playing pinball?
There is a joystick, and there's also flippers. So the mechanical pinball section operates as a traditional, of course smaller, it's not like super long, pinball machine. And the player hits targets with a metal ball using the flippers. And basically, the things that you collect on there don't matter at all except for in terms of score, because play always like is separated between the top and the bottom. So I think what happens is that Pac-Man can go down, or maybe it's Baby Pac-Man, the sprite doesn't look any different, can go down the maze instead of just the exits on the side. And if you go down the maze, that's when you enter the pinball mode.
Huh. I guess I should have known, since it's called Baby Pac-Man. I mean, it's obviously what it's going to be.
Right. Yeah. And then this one's a little more obvious, though. You have Professor Pac-Man, which was not released for, like, the NES or the Atari 2600. It was released
to solve equations.
Just for the arcade, and it's just a quiz game. It's like, it's just Pac-Man answering, like, which pair of sunglasses are the same, and it shows you, like, a graphic image of sunglasses, and then you have to, like, look at them and be like, it's B. B is the same.
So, like, Pac-Man is the character you're playing. He's like the star power they put into their trivia game?
Right. Essentially, that's what it is. People did not want this stuff, though, because none of these sold nearly as well. And so I think it's just funny that we have, like, Super Pac-Man, where there's a power-up where Pac-Man gets, like, to be twice as big. And it's like, now he's just overlapping the maze. Like, there's so many things that you can think of to do with Pac-Man, but at the end of the day, you should have just stuck with regular Pac-Man. And it just makes me question my own complaints in earlier games where I was like, oh, well, they should have added this or they should have added that. Like, maybe they shouldn't have. Maybe these games are a little more well laid out than I think they are.
I wouldn't give any credit to the people that we have in the past criticized, Mike. I think that shows that you are wrong on everything. So I would just say, to counter that Pac-Man, going back to how I think that it is not just a simple game, but an elegant game, it is hard to improve upon something that is pretty, like, platonically idealistic, you know? So whereas in another simple game, you can improve it by adding one feature or another, the essence of Pac-Man is just navigating this maze, and if you add a bunch of random shit like, spotting the difference between pictures or adding a pinball machine to the bottom of it, it's not going to have the same effect. I think that they may have made more interesting versions of it in the future, which I'm sure we're going to go into, but their first thoughts were not the correct thoughts.
Got it. Yeah, I think it's just confusing to get a game that I can't really critique, and that is because it's so simple. Like, I could say, oh, maybe they should have added more maze exits, it's cool that you can jump screen between left and right, but that's not so useful when you're trapped at the top or bottom. But, like, I don't know if it necessarily needed an exit at the
That's
top or
also
bottom.
a pretty nitpicky thing, you know? Like
That's true. That's true too.
It's not a core gameplay element like a lot of the things that we have problems with in like prior episodes.
Right. Okay, so here's another one. Should the dots have been on every single square inch of the maze, or should they have just kind of been carefully spaced out in pockets?
Well, I think you lose a little bit of that satisfaction we talked about before if it's carefully spaced out. I don't know. I think carefully spaced out would make you think about how to get to those places, but when it's covering the whole maze anyways, you still have to get to those places plus everywhere else. So I don't know. I like the way it is.
Okay,
Yes.
and then how about? This is just me trying. These aren't valid things. These are me throwing things out into the wind to try and find a fault with Pac-Man. Should it have been that if you eat a ghost and then he goes to the jail, right? I'm assuming that center thing is like jail. Should it have been that he's able to come right back out while you're still powerful, but meanwhile he's not blue? Like, why was he afraid of you when you had the power pellet, but then you eat him, he goes back to the jail and comes right out while you're still powerful, and he says, this time I'm not afraid.
See, I would say that, like, sort of countering the entire concept of this argument, that when you eat a ghost, you should be able to become a ghost and then chase another Pac-Man.
But I don't think of these as, like, real ghosts.
Yeah, they're definitely wearing some kind of
No, I think of these
canvas.
as real ghosts.
Like,
No, because, like they...
old
Like,
family
these
members?
are dead people.
No, they cannot be... Yeah, they can't
just
be,
kidding.
because I think... No, I think these ghosts have, like, an actual physicality to them. Because they touch you, and you die. You touch them when you're powerful, and they go to jail, at least. So that means something, you know?
I think that, like, just because, like, when you touch them, you die, it doesn't mean that they have any, like, matter to them. Like, it's not that they're a solid object. It's just that they're stealing your pack essence.
You think they
I will
shocked
say,
him,
though-
maybe? Like, they scared him, and that's why he, like, makes that shrieking sound? Like, they're...
No, I think
scared?
that, like, they're generally taking his life force, and then he crumples up into his constituent biological parts on the floor, and that's what that is. So I don't think that they have to be physical to turn Pac-Man into a pile of viscera. I don't think that's the case.
But now that you mention it, when I was younger, I actually did not. It never dawned on me that they were ghosts. Like when I first saw this, they look like. I always thought they were like some little tentacle-y creatures, like
Yeah, like
aliens
jellyfish.
or something. Something like that. But now I'm just so it's so ingrained to me that they're ghosts that I actually forgotten that I didn't believe that they were ghosts at the beginning.
Yeah.
You've unlocked like repressed memories.
Well, you know, if you watch any of the Pac-Man TV shows, you know, you'd probably learn a lot of the lore to each of these ghost characters, and you know, maybe like who they used to be before they died and stuff.
I think Pinky and Clyde were married at one point. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and apparently Inky is often depicted as a goofy and slow-headed ghost.
Oh, that's just unfair.
Yeah, I don't like that characterization.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I could joke with you right now and actually look up, like, deep lore for Pac-Man, like the fact that Inky's home is Ghostland, but honestly, this whole thing is just, like, mumbo-jumbo to me. Like, it's crazy that there are games like Pac-and-Roll and Pac-Land that I've never heard of that, like, have additional information on Pac-Man for me.
Well, Mike, you were trying to find a critique on the game.
Yes.
So can I give you a critique that I have,
Please.
particularly about the NES version?
Oh, this would be great, because you need a reason
that's
not
what
to
we're
put
talking
it
about.
on.
Yeah, we do. So like I said, I've played this in many other versions, and I'm sure everybody's played this in tons of different versions. And the biggest thing I noticed with the NES version is that the turn controls are like a little unresponsive, or maybe they're so precise that like I feel like I miss turns quite a bit. Like you can't just like press the button and hold it to turn, or like even for a second you have to like do like a sharp tap at the exact moment. I don't know if you guys had that experience, but I noticed I missed turns a lot, where I'm like, I definitely hit the button, but I must have timed it like poorly. Like the timing must just be so precise. Did you guys notice that?
Well, here's the thing, Joe. I'm a sucker for turns in Pac-Man. Like, that's my favorite thing to do in Pac-Man is to anticipate my next move.
Of all the other things to do in Pac-Man?
No, that's my favorite. And so what's interesting is like in the arcade version, it's very clear. And I don't know if it's just because the screen's bigger or what have you, but if you can only turn left or right as you're like moving up the maze, right? If you hold down like left as your option, it will register that and automatically move you left, even if there's nowhere to move left yet. Like, when you get to the point where you can move between left and right, it will register that and move you left. And that's what I really like about games like Pac-Man Championship Edition and Miss Pac-Man and stuff like that. I just couldn't pull it off in this game, and I wasn't sure if it was just that I didn't give it enough, like, if there wasn't enough room between the barriers for that to happen, like that the open spaces were just always right around the corner. But I couldn't pull it off in the sense that, like, if I tap left and then don't have it pre-registered, like holding it down, if it would go left or not. And so I would say that, like, that matters. Like, it's kind of important because being able to plot out your moves is what matters most in a game like Pac-Man, right?
Yeah, and I feel like in most games like this, this is going to sound like a weird nitpick, but when you're actually playing it, I feel like it's pretty noticeable. But like in other games, you'll kind of like hold the D-pad and like kind of roll your thumb to the next, to the right of the D-pad if you were on the up. Now I feel like you have to like you have to just do like a quick tap at the exact moment, and I feel like that was what was making me miss turns. Like if I were to just kind of roll my thumb to the other side of the D-pad, he just wouldn't respond.
Yeah, I can't say that I had the same experience. I thought that I was all right with like preloading my input. I still missed turns, but that's just I blamed myself in terms of like my reaction time. But I guess I don't have anything else to say on that topic.
Yeah, it just overall, like, just to sum it up, it felt harder to control than other versions of Pac-Man that I've played.
And I would argue that, like, for me, I prefer to play Pac-Man on a D-pad as opposed to a joystick. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but I like it when I'm purposefully pushing. If there's only 4 directions to go anyway, I like it when I'm purposefully toggling the direction I want on something like a D-pad or a keyboard than a joystick, which technically can, rotate a full 360 degrees.
Yeah, I think I would agree. If there's only 4 points, then might as well cut out any of the extra distraction there.
Not that it would register a diagonal movement anyway. It's just that I prefer to feel precise in my movements as Pac-Man. And did anybody even bother to collect the fruit? Like, do you guys care about stuff like that? Like, for us, high score doesn't matter. So, like, when you saw the fruit in the center, were you like, yeah, I'll just stop collecting the dots for a second and go get the fruit?
I would try and loop back around and grab it if an opportunity presented itself. But it was never my number one concern. But I still had that subconscious want.
Yeah, I think it's fun, right? It's like there's something about the fruit that's just fun to eat. It's like the whole game is about eating, so might as well.
Tasty.
Right. And it's like nice
keys.
to see it's nice to see the fruit that you've collected like on the side the whole time, so you can just like it's like your little trophies. So like I actually also went
you're
for
on your way to a picnic.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the end goal of this game. I also this is just like a real non sequitur, but I always thought that like the dots looked like little, like, what are those tiny little, like, pasta balls? And I always thought, like, those looked good, too. Like oh, like, he's eating pasta. No, the tiny little little spheres. They're, like, tiny and they're little is my only way of describing it.
Yeah, they're tiny and they're little. I know exactly.
Yeah,
also, they're pretty
like,
much like Pac-Man, though, right? They just look like Pac-Man if he just closed his mouth.
True. Yeah,
like baby
got
Pac-Man.
Smaller.
Maybe he's like those crabs that eat the baby crabs in front, like they give birth to them and then just immediately start eating them. Maybe that's what Pac-Man does.
Yes, and for the record, I'm thinking of whatever the pasta is in like Italian wedding soup. Those tiny little like
minestrone.
Dots. No.
Oh.
I honestly don't know. I thought you were talking about the little meatballs in Italian wedding soup for a second. And I was like, that's not a pasta.
I'll find the name of it.
Anyway, to get away from pasta for a second, did you guys know Pac-Man was originally called Puck-Man?
Yes.
Okay. And do you think that was a good decision to change his name?
I guess it's corruptible.
I think the reason was because of graffiti.
Yes.
Or vandalism.
Vandalism. I actually don't know what a pack is. Like Pac-Man does sound like the better way to describe him, but at the point that I was alive, it just felt right to call him Pac-Man. It was like it's like, yeah, everybody's going along with it. We'll call him Pac-Man.
You've been born with the knowledge,
right?
It's just something you cannot dispute.
Yes, exactly, and that's my feelings towards Pac-Man. Is like if I see him. Even though at one point it might have made sense to call him Pac-Man, I don't feel like that's correct.
It's like my mom told me that at a certain point they were thinking of naming me Vince, but I'm not Vince. I'm Sean.
Right.
So,
but you do look like a Vince.
And Mike, you kind of look like a Pete.
Oh no, that's no good.
Oh no.
We really didn't talk about our strategies for playing this game, and I know that it's pretty simple, and we've covered that gambit of it, but I wonder about for the ghosts and stuff like that, and the power pellets. Did you guys try to eat all four ghosts when you got the power pellets? Did you use that as an opportunity to just, like, eat more pellets on the screen while they stayed away from you? Joe, I'm curious to hear what you did.
I used the big power pellets as, like, I tried to spare them to keep them as like a defense. If suddenly I felt like I was being chased, I could go to the nearest power pellet and put the ghost on the defense. And I would try to eat the ghosts if they were within reasonable range. But then I watched a lot of like plays on YouTube also, and it looks like the people who are really good at the game will try and eat all the ghosts because they're trying to rack up their score. But for me, it was more of just a way to get them off my tail for a minute so I can continue trying to clear the level.
Yeah, I would say that I was sort of in the middle there, that I would hold off for a bit to see if I could get them close, because it is a very satisfying crunch whenever you get to them, and especially when they're all lined up for you. But at a certain point, like, you're not just going to leave the power pellet and then everything else around it empty for you to have to come back and clear. So it's just whatever situation I was in.
Yeah, I found myself actually, if I wasn't in any immediate danger, I would just lock my Pac-Man to whatever direction would keep him up against the side of the wall and wait for the ghosts to come near me, so that this way I could then, like, as soon as they got close enough, eat the power pellet and eat some of them and continue to clear the rest of the stage. So this way I was making, like, kind of progress on both, but focusing on the points.
So you were camping.
I was camping, yes, and I'm pretty sure that that's illegal in video games. You can't camp. Is. Yep. So I don't know how to play video games correctly, apparently. But I would say that is a legitimate strategy for everyone. It's the best of both worlds, in my opinion, because you can eat the ghosts that try to attack you when they know full well that there's a power pellet right around the corner. And then at the same time, you don't have to chase the other ones that didn't take the bait because they were smart enough, and chances are they're also smart enough to know what to do in the situation of a power pellet.
The amount of anthropization that you have for these anthropomorphizations, I find it very fun. I'm
don't worry.
Lost.
It's fine, because we found out, too, that Inky is actually a chef in the second cutscene of Pac-Man World. So he's scolded by Pac-Man for not making his cake chocolate. So these things all happen, and there is lore, and there is a universe established.
It's all behind
for
the
Pac-Man.
scenes.
Right. It's for the real nitty-gritty stuff. Pac-Man, is a thing that has, like, there's a song about him. There's like graffiti for Pac-Man all over the world, right? Like, that's just something it's iconic now at this point to associate Pac-Man imagery with gamers, and yet there's nothing really toxic about Pac-Man, right?
I thought that Pac-Man was a little racist at some point, but I do agree that now he's cleaned up his act.
Okay, that's good. And so I would like to just walk through some of the sequels and spin-offs, because there's a few that we have to talk about. And the most important one, I think, is Miss Pac-Man, which is the direct follow-up to Pac-Man and was the most successful Pac-Man game in North America in the arcades. For some reason, it sold more units than regular Pac-Man. I'm not sure if that's because they made Miss Pac-Man sexy, or because they made her like a Marilyn Monroe character.
I'd say that in addition to that, it was also because the cutscenes were much more high quality. Like, you get to watch a love story unfold.
Yeah, they were
really
like
next
titled,
gen.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they were titled. It was like they meet, they kiss. Like I remember that. Yeah. So that happens, and that's probably the first narrative in video games.
Yeah, it was really like you're playing that little story narrative by every level you defeat. It's like Quantic Dream, I think, developed it.
I think it's just important to, like, for Miss Pac-Man, for Pac-Man, they do, make him into a character with legs and arms and stuff like that, and then they go as far as to explain that, like, Pac-Man had legs even in the original Pac-Man game. He was just wearing rollerblades, so that's how he moved so fast. And
Wait, so are we looking at him top down?
Yeah,
No,
I don't.
yeah,
So
I
his
don't know.
mouth opens like sideways?
No, that's impossible. I think they just didn't have the memory. You have to use your imagination.
Right.
Okay? But, yeah, for certain things. You don't have to imagine how he walked. They'll explain that. It was rollerblades. But you should know that his mouth doesn't open sideways. But, Miss Pac-Man, it's weird because then they show her legs, but they make them like photorealistic women's legs and stuff, like very curvy and things. And I'm like, why? Like that just seems so unnecessary. But
were they photorealistic? Was it like a real image of legs?
No, that's terrifying. He's just saying that they're drawn.
They're like
a little
human.
bit more realistic.
yeah, they're drawn more realist than say, yeah, exactly. I don't know. It's like Betty Boop's legs, but with Miss Pac-Man's body. It's very strange. Anyway, and then there are many bad Pac-Man games that we just can't cover here. There's too many of them. But then there's the Pac-World games. Are you guys familiar with the Pac-Man World games?
No.
Are these the modern arcade titles?
They're the 3D platformers on the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2. And I think they might have gotten their way to the GameCube as well and stuff like that. I think they were called Pac-World. But I played this Pac-World 1, at least, growing up on PlayStation 1. I played that game, and I remember, because I had already played Super Mario 64 and Sonic Adventure, that my understanding as a kid was just like, well, of course, this is where Pac-Man needs to go. Like he needs to go to 3D and become a platformer just like Sonic did and just like Mario showed off how you can make the jump from 2D to 3D. But now, of course, I look at these games and they're garbage. So I kind of wonder, like, was Pac-Man just best left at like this very first game that just happens to be pretty close to perfection?
I think so. I think that the only thing that personally that I think you could improve upon is by taking this formula and changing things, like keeping it within the formula, changing the layout of the maze, maybe playing around with like having dots placed not everywhere or different ways you have to get there, but like nothing. I don't think it needs fancy power-ups or weird things that the power pellets do when you eat them. I think just having new challenges in the layout and keeping the sentiment the same, I think this game is just so simple. I think that's all it needs.
Joe, I got great news for you. It's a game called Pac-Man Championship Edition DX. It was on my top 5 games of the decade for the 2010s, if you remember that episode where we recorded that. And that's exactly what they did to finally set Pac-Man right.
It's very enjoyable in a multiplayer setting in the arcades.
And I think there's just something about how it took them 30 plus years to get to the point where they just say, oh, well, what if we just took the original formula and, I don't want to say it's like a rhythm game or something like that, but there is like a flow state to the game where the dots are placed, they're placed purposefully so that you can perfectly capture ghosts along your route. And then as soon as you finish that route of doing it correctly, a new route is placed where you catch even more ghosts. And then eventually it leads to a power pellet where you can eat like 60 ghosts at a time, all set to music. It's super satisfying. It's an amazing game. And I think that's what's crazy is like they tried to add things to the original Pac-Man. They tried to go away from that and turn Pac-Man into everything from a quiz show to a 3D platformer to Tetris games. They made Pac Attack, which was a Tetris game. They tried all those different things. And it's amazing because the brand was still just fine because people still enjoy that regular Pac-Man just A-okay. That when Pac-Man Championship Edition came out, people were like, whoa, what's this finally? Like a creative new spin on the formula that worked way back in 1980. But where do Pac-Man games go from here?
VR.
But you joke, Sean, but I was thinking, and this is serious. So even though it sounds crazy, remember the Budweiser commercial where they like turned Pac-Man into like real life, and they had a guy like run through a real life maze of Pac-Man?
No, but
okay.
I'm interested.
Yeah, it definitely, it was like a Super Bowl commercial, and they used it for like 2 years straight. Not at the Super Bowl, but like afterwards. It was just all over the place in terms of commercials. And I do wonder if like Pac-Man in VR, where you are like, first person running through these mazes, collecting the dots, and you can't see the ghosts on the screen. You just kind of like, as you turn the corners, you see them. I could imagine that turning into a little bit of like a survival horror style thing. Like it may well exist already in Alien Isolation, but like if you take it as a Pac-Man game, I think Pac-Man could do well in VR in that regard of like a new element of surprise for Pac-Man players.
I think
you would just...
I could do it, yeah.
You would just have to do something to make it not impossible. Like, you'd have to slow the ghosts down or make it so you could see them coming a little further ahead. Otherwise, you would just turn corners into ghosts all the time.
I think
and die.
it would be great, and it would look great on like the PS5 when it comes out if it was just people with sheets over their head.
Right. That's true too. I mean, if we want to just rip off directly from Pac-Man Verse, which was a crazy complicated to play GameCube game that required 3 Game Boy Advances as well. If you want to use that as an idea, the way that worked is Pac-Man could be controlled by a GameCube controller, and then if 3 Game Boy Advances using the Game Boy Advance to GameCube connector were plugged into the GameCube as well, they could control the ghosts on their Game Boy Advances. So this way it was 3 people as the ghosts and 1 person as Pac-Man. And that made it for like a fun thing where like no longer do you have to rely on the AI, it's people chasing, it's your friends chasing you down. I think that could work well in VR too, where like the ghosts are other VR players. So it's like nobody has any idea where they're going.
The real monsters are other people.
Right. And that's why they wear sheets to reveal themselves at the end. It's like you pull off the sheet and you see your friends and you're like, oh, you. But
I'd play it.
I think that's where Pac-Man goes from here, if we're being honest. I'm glad we kind of came to that conclusion, Sean, together. But yeah. I can't really see, because they did do Pac-Man Championship Edition 2, and it just didn't have the same type of magic because, again, they tried to add more things rather than just create new layouts of interesting solves on
I'm
top
watching
of what
it
they
now,
did with 1.
And it's just a little chaotic, so I'm not really sure.
Exactly. It has that Pac-Man Plus problem.
Yeah.
Yep. So I think if you want to do it, you got to look at the 1980 game and use new technology to make it fun again. But that's it for Pac-Man talk. We could have done a whole lot of things on development, but I don't think it's worth it because Pac-Man on the NES was developed by a bunch of people who were hell-bent on selling unlicensed video games.
Yeah, they do not deserve to be talked about.
Right. It is worth noting in terms of, like, why does the game play pretty well if it's unlicensed or if it is licensed? It doesn't matter which version you have. It's because it's actually all based off of Namco's official Famicom version of Pac-Man, which came out in 1984. So it took 4 years to get here. Namco's already made it, but they're not releasing it in North America. So instead, Tengen decides, like, we'll just take this and release it under some like shady deals and stuff like that, which is only going to get stranger because Namco is then in 1993 going to decide like, well, nobody can buy Pac-Man because Tengen's not allowed to sell it, so we might as well release it again. So we're going to do all this Pac-Man talk again in like 2028.
Okay, I mean that's enough time, I think.
Yep. Okay, so let's do the essential games list. Joe?
Well, I'm going to almost repeat myself from last week, although this game I enjoyed quite a bit, and I think it's got a level of simplicity and simplicity and just straightforward fun where you're just it's satisfying in a way where I think it's a play it. But it's also going to repeat Sean from last week. You've all played this. You all know what it is. It's a fun little look into like an old game and like into history. It's not going to blow your socks off or anything. You know, it's exactly what Pac-Man always has been. So I'm going to say it's a play it because I think for an arcade game to keep my attention this way is nothing to sneeze at, but it, you know, it still doesn't do anything where I'm itching to go back to it.
Yeah, I would. Okay, no, Sean's gonna go. Okay.
Okay, no, it's all right.
No,
yeah,
it's
Michael,
great.
go. Michael, go.
No,
I can go
okay,
again.
all right. Yeah, Joe, would you mind voting for me?
Yeah, I'm gonna repeat myself from a minute ago.
Yeah, I would say that Pac-Man is, as we've only referred to so far for, I believe, Donkey Kong, Pac-Man is an essential arcade game. It's one of the few video games everyone in the world should play. Like, it's so accessible that I can't imagine, like, a language barrier being a problem. Like everyone should play Pac-Man. And the fact of the matter is that you can play Pac-Man in an arcade still today. Like, it's one of the few arcade machines that you can find almost anywhere. You can play Pac-Man on the computer. You can probably play it if you type in Pac-Man on Google. I'm sure you can play that Google version of Pac-Man. You can play Pac-Man anywhere. So I don't think this NES version is anything to rave about. And so it'd be really weird to have it on games you must play on the NES, because you could play this game anywhere. So even though I would have considered it as an essential game, just because of the legacy status of it and how good it actually still is today, it's not going to be on our NES Essential Games list because there's nothing that makes the NES version special. I say whenever you can play Pac-Man, even if it's just for a minute or two, you should be playing it. So go for it. Sean?
Yeah, you've pretty much covered everything, so I'm just going to echo that. Pretend I said everything Mike said.
That's why I ran in, Sean. That's why I made sure that I could vote second.
Yeah, for sure. You just steal thunder.
Don't worry, Sean. You'll have plenty to say in your Essential Games vote next week when we cover Racket Attack. I know that you have been looking forward to that one, so we're going to let you kick off the Essential Games list vote for Racket Attack next week.
Okay. Yeah.
I think it's a tennis game, just if I had to take a guess. I'm not... It could be a fly swatting game.
I have had many thoughts about fly swatting in the past. So
yeah, I mean, there's a great fly swatting game in Mario Paint on the Super Nintendo. So it can happen. It can happen.
Anything.
Right here in your backyard. I think, you know, everybody should play Pac-Man today. If you listen to this episode and you didn't even get an itch to just like try the free version of Pac-Man that you can clearly find by Googling it. Like, I feel like any version of Java had this, you know? It's so accessible of a game that it makes me think, like, what else is like that? Like, Mario is locked behind Nintendo, so you can't just type in Super Mario Brothers and play it right in your browser without doing, like, some shady sites or you know, consciously doing something wrong. But Pac-Man...
Emulation is illegal.
Yeah, Pac-Man you can play... emulation's only illegal if you don't own the thing you're emulating. Right. Yeah. But, you know, Pac-Man is something that you do have access to. It's almost like a good that's available to everybody.
It's like air.
Yeah.
It's like the library.
Yeah, Pac-Man and Tetris are like the library.
Right.
You can play them anywhere.
Yourself to play some Pac-Man right now. Or just mow the lawn.
All right. Yep.
Or mow the lawn, yeah.
Mowing the lawn is like playing Pac-Man. You heard it here first. Joe, any other words of encouragement?
I think I don't want to dole them all out too quickly, so maybe next week.
Okay, that sounds good. Sean, anything else you want to say to the listeners?
I actually don't have any more words in my vocabulary.
I thought you were just going to not say anything to that question.
Yeah, that would be fun. I will say that if you enjoyed this week's episode or any of the episodes that we've ever done, we'd love to hear about it. You can tweet us at NostalgiaCast on Twitter. We're very active there. I think I posted a lot of weird Pac-Man stuff and some vintage Puckman stuff. I think Pac-Man went through like a lot of different design phases, but it's important to know that he does wear a hat. And
I wasn't aware of that.
Pac-Man wears a hat through most of the 80s and the early 90s, and if you didn't know that, you're just not a Pac-Man fan, because it's the same hat every time too. So I think it's a red trilby is what I want to call it.
Wow, I didn't know that Pac-Man was a neckbeard.
Yes, in a way. I'm Mike Esposito. You can find me at Esposito Film on Twitter, and I'll talk to you soon.